Why is it that so many AAA games today feel empty? Not necessarily broken or bad, although that does happen more often too. But they feel void of the passion that fueled the growth of the gaming market in the first place. When I think back to games that I grew up with, Metal Gear Solid, Half-Life series, BioShock, Oblivion, Fallout, F.E.A.R, I don't just remember the gameplay, I remember how these games made me feel, as I'm sure you do as well. You remember the atmosphere they created, the soundtracks, the characters, the worlds that the developers built, the strange feeling that every hallway, every conversation and sound, every mission and every reward was placed there for a very specific reason. And that's the whole point. These games had an identity and a soul. You could feel the passion from the people who made them. And that's because the developers or the creative team had one complete vision. And maybe that's why so many of us keep going back to these games. And to me, that was the golden age of gaming. And as someone who makes games myself, I think that's the part people are really missing. In this video, I'm going to attempt to answer a question that feels more relevant than ever. Has the golden age of gaming really died? Now, before we move on, I do want to acknowledge that there is no universally correct definition for the golden age of gaming. It may be different to you personally than to someone else depending on your age group, so this may be more of a personal video, but I do think it's safe to say for me and many others, it really was the mid-90s to late 2000s, circa even 2011 and 12. If we compare to modern games, one of the biggest differences back then was storytelling. In the late 90s and 2000s, it felt like many major studios were trying to prove that games could tell stories in ways that films couldn't. For instance, Metal Gear Solid wasn't just a stealth game, it was a political thriller about nuclear weapons, genetics, soldiers, identity, and control. Metal Gear Solid 2 went even further, exploring information control, digital manipulation, and how society might be shaped by the internet before those themes became part of everyday life. Metal Gear Solid 4 further built on the idea of complete control by large organizations through nanomachines that improved soldier performance on the battlefield, while telling the emotional story of how Snake or Old Snake's body was wearing away as the game progressed. Hideo Kojima was eerily accurate in his predictions of how the world would be, by the way. Comment below if you agree, and also like the video and subscribe. This is a good point where I insert the subscription finger pointing at your... Please subscribe. Then you had games like BioShock. This is one of my all-time favorite games. BioShock didn't just tell you about Rapture, it let you discover Rapture for yourself. You learned about the city through its architecture, audio diaries, propaganda, enemy design, environmental details, and the consequences of its ideology. Another one of my great favorites, and I'm sure tops most people's lists, Half-Life 2, managed to maintain a compelling story throughout the whole game with little to no actual cutscenes. If you noticed, majority of the storytelling was done in-game, something which F.E.A.R also managed to do really well, and it's a game I covered in my last video where we explored F.E.A.R's AI system. What happened to that, by the way? I remember it being a big thing that we finally had the technology for in-game cutscenes, which kept you immersed in the story. But I feel like we're just back to doing cutscenes again, which I don't mind if done correctly. And that's the key difference. Back in the 90s and 2000s, the story would either complement the gameplay, or the gameplay would complement the story. At least that's how it felt for me as the player. Today, a lot of big games have stories, but many of them feel more superficial. You get a cinematic intro, a few emotional cutscenes, some dialogue between missions, and then it's hours of map clearing. The story exists, but it doesn't always feel like the game, and more specifically the gameplay, was built around it or vice versa. And that's one of the core problems. The gameplay and story don't feel connected, and gameplay is crucial to video games. In fact, for me, it's the most important thing to a video game. Why? Because it's unique to video games as a form of entertainment, right? There's no gameplay in movies, for example. This is where older games often shined, as they were free to take greater risks. In Metal Gear Solid, the stealth gameplay reinforced the fantasy of being a lone infiltrator, and that's how I genuinely felt as a 10-year-old playing Metal Gear Solid for the first time. Come to think of it, there are many games I really shouldn't have played at the age of 10. Am I right, boys? Subscribe if you know. Actually comment, actually do both because it helps the algorithm. I felt like I was all alone in Shadow Moses. Moreover, the soundtrack reinforced this feeling. In BioShock, the moral choices around little sisters weren't just story decoration. If you chose to rescue them, you received less Adam, but it led towards the good ending. However, choosing to harvest them gave you more Adam but pushed you towards the darker ending. This gameplay story connection by creative director Ken Levine and the team at Irrational Studios was one of the key pieces that shaped the success of the gaming industry. In the Fallout, Oblivion, and Skyrim games, your character build, dialogue choices, and faction decisions shape the world around you. Climbing the ranks of the Thieves Guild, for instance, would give you status among thieves, however, you wouldn't be so popular with the guards.
Stop, criminal! I've heard of you. Your criminal exploits are well known.
If you paid your fine, stolen items were confiscated, and if your infamy increased too much, it would also yield additional consequences. The point is, the game wasn't just telling you, hey, you're a thief, it made you live with the consequences of behaving like one. And that's something so crucial which is missing in video games at the moment. I feel like across the gaming industry and even in films, the directors or creators are content with just painting the picture for you rather than helping you discover it or engrossing you in it or letting you put the pieces together and live it out. One good example of this is the Grey Cowl of Nocturnal. By the end of the Thieves Guild questline, you gain the legendary Cowl of the Grey Fox. When you put it on, the world no longer sees your character, it sees the Grey Fox, a wanted criminal. Guards react to you differently, your identity changes, and your crimes are tied to that persona. Even F.E.A.R, which people mostly remember for its AI, used gameplay to support atmosphere. The way soldiers communicated, flanked, and reacted made every combat encounter feel tense and unpredictable.
Look out!
That tension made the horror stronger, and that's wherein the problem lies with the current generation of games. The story tells you something urgent is happening, but the gameplay tells you to collect 40 crafting materials, clear 12 enemy camps, and unlock a cosmetic backpack. And that disconnect is why some modern games feel emotionally hollow. Another major difference is level design, and I take this one close to heart because it's one of my favourite aspects of game development. Older games often felt like their spaces were specifically designed for the experience being created. F.E.A.R's office blocks, warehouses, and corridors weren't huge open worlds, but they were perfect combat spaces. The rooms had cover, flanking routes, and destructible objects. The AI felt smart, partly because the level design gave it the right stage to perform on. BioShock's Rapture worked the same way. Every room told you something different. A theatre, a medical pavilion, a flooded hallway, a propaganda poster, a broken vending machine. These weren't just assets scattered around a map. They were the narrative pieces in the level design supporting the overall story. Another great example is how Metal Gear Solid used its level design to create tension. Security cameras, guards, vents, codec halls. All of this supported that feeling of infiltration. Oblivion gave players a world that felt strange, dangerous, and full of areas to be discovered. You could pretty much go anywhere in the world of Oblivion, and it felt like that place had a lot of history, whether it be a guild quest, a ruin, or an Oblivion gate. And the sad irony is that most modern games are often much bigger due to the advanced technology, but their poor game and level design choices often leave them feeling smaller. A huge map filled with repeated activities can feel smaller than a tightly designed level where every room has intention. And that's one of the strange contradictions of modern gaming in my personal opinion. The worlds became larger, but the sandbox where the players actually game became less memorable. And this leads me in nicely to something that had a huge impact on the birth of the golden age of gaming in the first place, and that's sound design. And for me as a game developer, it is one of the most underrated reasons why older games stuck with people. It's where that nostalgia comes from. A lot of the times you might not remember specific moments in a game, but you'll remember the soundtracks and how the game made you feel. It's all about building that atmosphere. And Silent Hill 1 and 2 are a great example of that. They use static to warn you when monsters were nearby, and even long stretches of uncomfortable silence played a role in building the psychological horror. Dead Space used audio cues of the necromorphs crawling through the vents, and it kept me on my toes. And let me know if you'll never forget Isaac's scream for the rest of your existence. Another one I mentioned earlier, but it's an obvious one, we'll never forget the codec sound.
It's Snake. I'm in front of the disposal facility.
Like, that alone is just a great example of why sound design is so important. Another one of my favorite examples of great use of sound is in the world of Rapture. It made it feel both alive and dead at the same time, with distant voices, leaking pipes, old music, radio messages, creating this constant memory of a world that was once lived in but fell apart.
Welcome to Rapture, the world's fastest growing pilot joke.
F.E.A.R used sound to make combat readable, with enemies shouting their intentions as they called out your position to each other, and that helped you understand what was happening around you. That's the crucial part. A lot of modern games have technically amazing audio, but sometimes the soundscape becomes so cinematic, so crowded, and so polished that fewer sounds become iconic. There's nothing to remember when you pick up these games. Older games often had limitations, but those limitations forced clarity. Every sound had to be important, had to matter, had to have a specific purpose. Now this next one is less exciting, but it matters a great deal in our overall user experience as gamers, and that's optimization. Modern games are technically more complex, that's obvious. Higher resolutions, textures, bigger worlds, ray tracing, more animation data than ever, and then the additional live service systems, and we really just don't need that. But all that adds weight in data. And the question is, do we really want or need all of this extra weight? I personally feel games were better when the developers had less tools at their disposal. It forced them to be more creative. I'm not saying I want smaller worlds or poor graphics, but I'm saying that studios can be a bit smarter in where they place the emphasis. I feel like if you try and do everything perfectly, you end up doing nothing uniquely. And ultimately it leads to us having to deal with massive install sizes, huge updates, and games that are just unfinished. When a game takes over 100 gigabytes to download, launches with performance issues, and causes my PC to think it's a jet engine, and then asks for premium editions, well, people like myself naturally start asking, what is the point of all this? I'll just go back to playing my existing gaming library. And why does a game from the 2000s sometimes feel more carefully built than something released today? Again, I understand that modern development is harder, there are more moving parts, more variables to contend with. But from the player's perspective, optimization is part of respect. A game that runs well, loads quickly and feels complete at launch, creates trust. However, for me, the biggest change is gamification. When I say gamification, I'm referring to the reward loop. Older games were built around the idea that if you played, explored, mastered systems, and pushed yourself forward, you were rewarded, actually progressing in the game. You actually unlocked weapons and earned costumes. You didn't just receive the content, you achieved it. And that feeling matters. Players want to feel a sense of accomplishment. Today, a lot of reward structure has been removed out of the game. Deluxe editions placed into pre-order bonuses. And guys, I know this particular topic has been covered to death, but it is also a crucial part of what made the golden age of gaming, well, golden. Sometimes the reward for playing the game is replaced by the option to pay more before you've even started. And this changes the psychology. When a cool outfit used to mean I beat the game on hard mode, it said something about the player. Now it might mean I just bought a deluxe edition. That doesn't create the same emotional attachment for the consumer. If you think about it, it's literally a quick cash grab for big studios rather than a long-term return on investment, as it would actually increase replayability of the game. And ultimately, the game respected your time by giving you meaningful rewards for engaging with it. Most modern games today, on the other hand, will often ask for your time and your money. Has the golden age of gaming really died? I know I've been very critical here, and I'm not going to go back on what I said. I think all of those elements that I mentioned are absolutely crucial to making a very good game, a fantastic game. However, I do think there are also signs of a resurgence. I want to make a note that I truly believe great games still exist. I've played them. Great stories still exist. Great developers are still around. But I do think the mainstream industry has changed. In the 90s and 2000s, many major games felt like they were trying to push the medium forward through its design, through its storytelling, through the sound, the gameplay system, the secrets and rewards. Many large studios today, however, are either too afraid to take the same risks that they used to, resting on their success, or are too financially constrained by their shareholders and parent companies. When you look at some of the older development documentaries of studios from the 90s and 2000s on YouTube, you could see game developers were genuinely in control, and you could actually experience their passion as you played the game. And perhaps that's what's changed, and what people really mean when they say gaming used to be better. They miss a time when games felt like complete experiences driven by the passion of the dev teams, when the different aspects like story and gameplay all served the player. So I'm going to give you a clear answer. I don't think the golden age of gaming has really died, but I do think it's fading away, and it's the real reason people keep going back to the older classics, because they were built with purpose and intent. And I do believe that this movement by gamers has shook the industry in a good way. As we get a surge of indie devs and smaller dev teams, I do believe there could be a new golden age of gaming on the horizon. But I'm really eager to know what you think in the comments below and what games you find yourself frequently coming back to, if not just to feel that sense of engrossment in games that once had passion. If you watched to the end of the video, I just want to say a massive thank you. And if you enjoy this type of content, let me know by liking, sharing, subscribing. As always, drink some coffee, code, and I'll catch you in the next one.